so rather than risking missing some of it, I figured we'd just go ahead and get started. I wanted to start off by introducing Christine. It's my great pleasure to introduce Christine Alvarado. I have had the pleasure of knowing her for more years than I can figure out. I tried to figure that out. I couldn't, and I failed. But Christine got her undergraduate degree at Dartmouth and her master's and PhD from MIT. She's currently a lecturer with security and employment at UCSD. Like they looked up tenure in the dictionary, and then they added some extra words. Having first been a faculty member at Harvey Mudd, among the other great things that she has done, including being a member of the AP Computer Science Principles Development Committee and the CRA's Education Committee, Christine was instrumental in leading the dramatic increase in diversity in Harvey Mudd's computer science program, and I'm delighted to have her here today. All right, thanks.
All right, thank you so much. I've really had a good time here today, so I'm really excited to be here and to tell you about the work that I've been doing. So I'm going to talk about some programs and some strategies that I've been helping to develop to bring computer science to a broader group of students, particularly focused on the higher education space. So I'll start off motivating this talk with a quote from the last US president, President Obama, who we miss dearly. Oh, I'm being recorded. No, I don't think that's okay. I think that's okay. Which basically kicked off the CS for All movement. So in his State of the Union address in 2016, he called for every student to get a high-quality computer science education in the K-12 system. So he really made computer science a priority, particularly for K-12 in the United States. But the question then becomes, for those of us who work in the higher education space, what does this really mean for higher education? There's been a lot of focus on developing resources for really high-quality curricula in the K-12 space, but what's been going on at the higher education level? Well, probably you've been experiencing the same thing we've been experiencing, which is this is what's been going on in the higher education space. The students have been flooding into our programs. So this is data from the recent CRA Generation CS Enrollment Surge report, tracking the average number of CS majors per unit over the past 10 years. And you can see that these numbers are just skyrocketing across the country and even across internationally. So students are coming to our programs in numbers like we haven't seen ever before. I know I've talked to many of you here that this is a reality here as well. But if we look closer, so in particular at UC San Diego, we have over 3,000 undergrads in either CS or closely related majors. So we have almost 2,000 computer science majors and about 1,400 either math, CS, or CE majors who aren't in our department, who share a large number of courses with our department. So it's a huge number of students that we're struggling to teach effectively. But then if we look a little closer at who these students are, and the CRA report does this, we see that the representation from different genders and from different racial and ethnic groups is not equal yet. Well, things have improved. So this is showing the percentage of women in CS courses in 2005, 2010, and 2015. And we can see that there have been improvements here. So we've gone up from, for example, at the introductory level for majors, from about, let's say about 17% to about 23%. So this is an increase. We can see here, especially at these upper level courses, we're nowhere near where we would like to be in terms of gender balance. We're only at about, let's see, where's that line? That line is at 15, so about 17% women at the upper division. And if we look at racial and ethnic representation, we see a similar story. That although there have been some gains in the percentage of racially underrepresented minorities who are taking our classes, we're still not at a level where we would like to be. So at the upper division, which is perhaps most representative of the students who are truly going through our program fully, we have about, still on average, 17% women and only 9% underrepresented minority students. So this is not where we want to be. We want to get closer to a representation that matches the population at large. Okay, so the question that I ask that drives everything that I do is, how do we create structures and programs that are going to support all students in computer science at the college level? So there are a couple of ways that we could approach this question. So so based on previous research, what we found is that some of the key aspects to approaching this question is that we really need to show students what computer science is. Many students come into college and they really don't know what computer science is. They think of it as just programming in a room all by themselves. So we want to show them the broad range of aspects there are to computer science. We need to address different pre-college computer science experience levels. Students are coming in with a vast range of pre-college experiences, and that can be very challenging when a student who has very little experience enters this introductory course where it's supposed to be for people with no experience, but they look around and 80% of the people already know everything that's being taught. That's kind of an intimidating situation, and it's hard to cope with a class that has such vastly different experience levels. A big part of this is building students' confidence. So students who have less experience or who don't necessarily think of themselves, they don't have a CS identity, often also have a lower confidence level. They don't believe that they can do it and make it through a CS program. And we definitely need to work on creating inclusive culture, a culture where there are multiple paths to success, where it's not all about becoming a Google software developer immediately upon graduation, that there are lots of things we can do with computer science and lots of values that we want to promote. So there's two ways we can address these problems, and I've done both. We can focus on the content of what we're teaching. So these would be things like developing new introductory course curricula, things like that. So that's a great way to address some of these issues. But it's not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to focus on structural aspects of trying to incorporate some of these aspects into our computer science education. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about what I mean by this structural component. I'm going to talk about, hopefully, 4 different things, if I have time. I'll talk about the work that I was involved with at Harvey Mudd, which developed some structures that help gender balance the computer science major, went to nearly 50% women now, and sort of this has been sustained. I'll tell you about the 2 things that I've done, or 2 of the things I've done at UC San Diego. The Early Research Scholars Program, which is an early career research apprenticeship opportunity for second-year students. And I'll tell you about a pedagogical structure in the classroom called microclasses, where we took large classes and divided them up into smaller groups to make students feel a little bit more included, like part of a community in this very large class. And then if I have time, I'll tell you a little bit more about the work that I've done, scaling up further, developing a course for Coursera in an online MOOC platform. So let me start with Harvey Mudd, because this is the sort of thing that I'm sort of maybe perhaps most known for helping out with, and I'll just jump right to the point. Here's what happened at Harvey Mudd. So there was a time, so what you'll see here is this red line, this is Talby survey data. This is tracking the percentage of women in CS undergraduate degree programs, who graduate with a CS undergraduate degree. And you can see that this line has ranged from near around 20%, it got up as high as sort of 20% in the early 2000s, and then has come down a little bit and kind of goes back up, and it hovers right around 15 to 20%. And it's been fairly stable over time. This blue line here is showing the percentage at Harvey Mudd. So the percentage of women who were graduating with computer science, the percentage of computer science degrees that were awarded to women. And you can see here that up until about graduation year 2010 or 2009, which is incoming class of 2006, these incoming classes will become important in a moment, it was tracking fairly steadily along that Talby line. So sometimes it was a little bit lower, a tiny bit higher, but more or less around 15 to 20%. And then in 2006, entering year 2006, graduation year 2010, things started to slope upward to the point where the percentage of students who were women who were getting degrees in computer science started to approach 50%. And what I'm showing you here in this green line is the overall percentage of women in the class at Harvey Mudd College. It's an engineering school, so it wasn't gender balanced until just a couple of years ago. And so in 2006, these numbers started to track along the percentage of women at the college as a whole. So we were seeing a better representation in terms of the representation of gender at Harvey Mudd. So the question then becomes, what did we do? So we made a few changes in 2006 that we think played a large role in this gender balance of our major. And I'll tell you about what those 3 changes were very briefly. So the changes that we made. The first thing that we did, or one thing that we did all these three things at the same time. So it's great from an impact perspective, terrible from a research perspective, because we have no idea which of these things actually made the difference. And actually I'll tell you at the end that I think it's something entirely orthogonal that made the true difference here. But the things that we did were the following. We developed a new CS1 experience, a CS1 course called CS for Scientists. And this was designed to be a broad introduction to the field of computing aimed at students who were generally interested in science and engineering, which was the student body at Harvey Mudd, rather than a strict programming CS1 type course. And that was to address this, this issue that students don't necessarily know what CS is when they come into college. And we had some changes that helped address different pre-college experience levels as well that I'll tell you about. To address students' confidence and kind of even the playing field in terms of confidence, we started offering research experiences to, at first, primarily women in their rising sophomore summer. So after their first year, we started including them in our research labs. And then to promote an inclusive culture, we started taking trips, large groups of first-year women students to the Grace Hopper celebration of women in computing. How many of you in this room have been to Grace Hopper celebration? Okay, a few of you. If you haven't been, you should go at least once. It's a sort of eye-opening, transformative experience. It's thousands, like 13, 15, 18,000 technical women all in one place celebrating the accomplishments of technical women. It's a very cool, inspirational place to be. So let me tell you a little bit more about each of these to get an idea of why these might have changed, caused the changes that I talked about. So our CS1 course at Harvey Mudd. Before 2006 looked like a very traditional computer science 1 course. It was an introduction to programming in Java. It was fairly interactive, so Harvey Mudd is a teaching-focused school, so it wasn't, a person standing up here giving a lecture in a very dry way. It was an interactive class that was divided into a 75-minute lecture and then a 75-minute hands-on lab each week. And it was taught by one of the most popular, good instructors in the whole school. So it was not a bad class in any way. Every student at Harvey Mudd had to take this course, had to take and pass this course. So there were about 200 students a year that went through this course, and to divide the students into smaller classes, students were randomly assigned to 4 sections of about 50 students each. And there was one set of homework assignments, and those homework assignments were done in Java. Now, this was a good course, but what we found was that it wasn't really changing a lot of attitudes. So students reported liking the course, but at the end of the day, students who came in interested in computer science came out of the course super excited about computer science. Students who came in not really knowing what computer science was all about came out of the course being like, okay, I'm done with that, and then they went on and about their day. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to make some changes to welcome the students that didn't have any prior CS experience, who didn't know anything about CS, but also keep the students who did want to pursue a CS path engaged and keep them challenged. So in order to do this, we made a couple different changes to the course, but the one I want to focus on again is the structural change that we made to the course. So what we changed in 2006 and onward was we divided the course into 2 different streams or tracks. So this is just one course, but it has 2 different streams now. And we called them Computer Science 5, CS5 Gold, and CS5 Black. Those are the Harvey Mudd colors. So the CS5 Gold track was for students who had absolutely no pre-college computing experience. Like none at all. They've never taken a CS course, they've never programmed on their own. And surprisingly, in 2006, that was the majority of the students coming into Harvey Mudd, which was pretty surprising to us because it's a science and engineering school, and nearly 75% of the students coming in had never done anything with computer science before. I think it's probably a little more balanced now, but there's still a significant fraction that have never done any computer science before college. And then the black section had students who had some experience in it. We changed the structure around a little bit too, such that now there were 2 75-minute interactive lectures and an incentivized 2-hour lab as well. And the reason it had to be incentivized and not required is we couldn't change the number of contact hours required of the students. So we just put in some structures to encourage them to come to those labs. Okay. The students were divided not by random assignment, but by prior experience. So students with absolutely no experience went into this gold track. Students with some experience went into the black track. And then if students were misplaced, or they felt that they were misplaced, they were allowed to switch by their own volition in the first 3 weeks of the course. So the courses were scheduled at the same time, so students could switch back and forth. But I think they could only go back, like over and back. They couldn't like keep going back and forth. So they could go over and be like, I think this course is too easy, let me try the hard one. Whoop, nope, too hard, let me go back, and then they were done. They were there for the rest of the quarter. And then the assignment structure changed as well. We changed the language we use. That's more of a content change. But we changed the structure in that the 2 tracks did slightly different assignments that taught the same basic CS concepts. So the gold the students in the gold section would be doing a basic version of the structures and techniques that students were trying to learn that week. While the advanced students were doing usually most things the gold students were doing, but then more on top of that. And the more wasn't like more stuff that was coming up soon or like data structures they were going to see in the next course. It was like truly advanced applications of computer science that they wouldn't see necessarily until the upper division. And the idea was that we didn't want to get these students ahead. We wanted to kind of occupy them and entertain them with things where they could kind of spin their wheels, letting the other students catch up. So by the time they saw everything in the upper division, the playing field would be a little more level anyway. But yeah, it was important to us that we weren't just pushing these students along faster, because then the other students would never catch up. Okay, so that was our changes to our CS1 course. And I'll talk about a little bit some of the results. I don't have a lot of results in this slide deck, but we really found that it changed the whole atmosphere of the course. So when I taught this course, and I taught the gold section primarily, and I would come into the course, and the first day of class I would say, raise your hand if you're scared to be in this course. And every hand in the room would go up, and students would look around and be like, wow, that's amazing. Like, I didn't know other people were worried about this. Whereas the students who were like gung-ho and ready to go, they could be off in their own little world, geeking out without frightening the students who were like, I don't know what I'm doing yet. And it was a really big change in the culture and in sort of the atmosphere of the class. Okay, so the second change we made was to offer research experiences for primarily at first aimed at women students in their rising sophomore summer. So we looked around at the other majors at the university or at the college and noticed that other majors were interacting with their students very early on. So rising sophomores could get research opportunities. Like in a chemistry lab, they were doing some mechanics of the experiments. But we were really not engaging students in research till much later in their careers, like after their junior year perhaps. And the students who we were engaging early were the students who came in to Harvey Mudd with a lot of pre-college experience, which didn't tend to be the women students. So we said, well, you know what, let's try to find some projects that these early students could do after only having 1 or 2 classes in computer science. So we deliberately designed some projects, and in the first year we had some funding to deliberately hire women rising sophomores into these research labs. And they did a variety of projects that actually turned out to be very successful that didn't require that much computer science knowledge coming in. So this is a group of students here that developed a program called Senior Prom, and it was a version of Dance Dance Revolution. Anybody know Dance Dance Revolution, the video game? For senior citizens. So it had some very slow waltz steps, and it was designed to improve mobility and exercise for senior citizens. And they actually went to a local senior center, did some user tests, and measured the results of this application. So this was something they did in just like a very easy pie game environment that they could do with just their CS1 and CS2 knowledge. They would do a lot of kind of programming competitions, robotics competitions, projects, because it kind of doesn't matter how well the students get the robot to go. As long as they get it to go, it's fun, and they get a lot out of it. So the kinds of projects that we found to be very successful were those where the students had some autonomy, but the sort of how far they got was a very smooth ramp, right? They could do a little bit very quickly, and then they would just build to the extent that they could toward some end goal. So the first year, we hired women because we had dedicated funding to hire these women, but it really caught on, and after the dedicated funding kind of went away, we continued hiring students with very little experience, and we hired them in sort of equal numbers of women and men. And so we stopped this process of like only hiring people that had tons of pre-college experience. The third thing we did was we started taking trips to the Grace Hopper celebration, as I mentioned, and we started taking trips with primarily first-year women students. So these numbers that are shown here is how the trips grew over the years from 2006 up to 2010, and the trips actually continued to grow after this point. But the way this sort of started was, Grace Hopper in 2006 was in San Diego, which is just down the road a couple hours from LA, where Harvey Mudd is. And I was teaching this intro course, and I had never been to Grace Hopper, and I said, well, I want to go to Grace Hopper, and I want to take some students. And so instead of taking senior level students, I said, well, I'll just take the students in my class. I'll see who wants to come. And I got a few students who were interested in coming, and we went, and we had such a good time. And these first year students were like, they were so transformed by this experience. So I said, that worked out well. So let's try again next year. So the next year we took a bigger group to Orlando, Florida. And they had such a good time. They came back and told all their friends. And then next year we took 22 first year students to Keystone, Colorado. And it just kept growing and growing and growing and became this big thing, to the extent where in 2010 we took 35 first year students. I think a couple of years later they took something like 60, almost 50 or 60 first-year women students, which if you think about it, there's 200 students per class at Harvey Mudd, and it's not 50-50 men and women, so we were taking nearly all the first-year women students to Grace Hopper at some point. And so it was having this really big impact on this huge group of people, seeing this very exciting, inclusive environment where they could see themselves going. And the most impactful thing about these trips, I believe, was the career fair. As much as, those of us who go to Grace Hopper a lot say, oh, the career fair, it's too big. But they were just so thrilled to talk to these people from Facebook, from Google, from places they've heard of, and those people from Google saying, hey, come talk to us, we want to hire you, like, we're interested in you. And they'd never had that experience of like having somebody interested in them and actually thinking they were going to come work for them. And it was this very empowering feeling for the students. Okay, so these were the three sort of changes that we made, but they worked well largely because of the context that we were in. It wasn't just about the changes. So let me tell you a little bit more about the Harvey Mudd context and what really was, I think, a key driver in those changes that we made to the percentage of women. So Harvey Mudd, as I mentioned, small school, 200 students each undergraduate year, 4 undergraduate years. Students go through in very much lockstep in this very small program. Science and engineering focused. All students have to take this intro CS course. Every student there has a strong interest in science and engineering. That's why they come to Harvey Mudd. They wouldn't come if they didn't. And the primary focus, what the faculty are rewarded for very strongly, is excellence in undergraduate teaching. Yes, all the faculty members do research, but that is absolutely secondary to their teaching activities. So it is this place where there's a strong focus, this small community, where changes can have a big effect. Moreover, there were only 9 CS faculty, 3 of whom were women, so we had a pretty good representation of women on the faculty itself. We had about 30 to 40 CS majors per year, so it's not a huge community that we're dealing with here. And Maria Clave was the president. So that was a huge help because the faculty were devoted to these efforts. We had a president who was devoted to these efforts, who essentially greased the wheels at every turn. So she would pour resources in, she would talk about these efforts, she would just make things happen, and everything happened seamlessly and smoothly. So I think it was the people, the reward systems, the small environment that went a long way into making these dramatic, very fast changes at Harvey Mudd. Now, the question then becomes, how can we replicate this success, these changes, at other, perhaps more challenging institutions? And that is what I wanted to focus on when I moved to UC San Diego in 2012. So UC San Diego is a very, very different place. It's a lot more similar to here. I think talking to people today, it's a very similar place. We've got over 35,000 undergraduate students in the whole program and in the whole university, and many, many, many graduate students. It's very focused on graduate education as well. There are 6 colleges. So UC San Diego is organized into this college system. So each undergraduate is a member of a college, and then they take their major separately from their college. And we have all kinds of majors, right? You name it, we've probably got an undergraduate major for it. And of course, the primary focus of the institution is research. That's what faculty are hired to do. That's what the university sort of prides itself on. There are over 60 faculty in, I say 60, there's, technically it's I think 55 FTEs. So some of these are joint appointments, some of these are, lower time, but it's 60 CS faculty in our department, and including 11 women, so not quite as high a concentration of women, and as I mentioned before, we have over 3,000 CS or closely related majors in our program. So much more challenging environment. And the question that I wanted to ask when I moved there is, can the strategies at Harvey Mudd be implemented at UCSD with a similar success? So let me tell you about a couple of things that I've done. I mean, the answer is like not as dramatic quite yet, but it's still a work in progress. So let me tell you about a couple of things that I've implemented at UCSD, or helped implement at UCSD. So the changes we made at UCSD to address different experience levels for our incoming students. We developed a program called the Summer Program for Incoming Students, and this is joint work with a couple of my colleagues, really led by Mohan Patouri. I'm not going to talk about that today. I just want to mention it because that is a big piece of the efforts that we've made. To build students' confidence, we developed a program called the Early Research Scholars Program. I'll tell you about that one. And then to promote an inclusive culture in the classroom, I'll tell you about a pedagogical technique that we developed called microclasses. So I'll focus on these two. All right. So, oh, and by the way, if anybody has any questions or anything at any point, please do ask. I'm happy to chat. Okay, so the Early Research Scholars Program. So the goal of the Early Research Scholars Program was that when I came to UCSD, I noticed that there was a surprising lack of engagement of the undergraduates in research. At Harvey Mudd, it was all about undergraduate research because there were no grad students. So if you wanted to do research, you were probably doing it with undergrads. At UCSD, we have these 3,000 undergrads, but very, very few of them were doing research. And it's not because there wasn't research at UCSD. There was tons of research. It was just that it was primarily aimed at the graduate student level. So I was hoping that we could leverage that very well-developed research structure to bring more authentic learning experiences to our undergraduate population. So that was the goal, particularly focused on students who don't traditionally get involved in research, and especially not early in their careers. So this tends to be students with less experience, less confidence, correlated with their gender, their racial identity, their first-generation college status, all these sort of minority characteristics. So the desired outcomes for this program was that I wanted it to increase students' confidence. I wanted it to increase their interest in computer science and in their coursework they were learning. And I was hoping that it would increase their retention and their success in the major. But it needed to fit within the constraints of our program. So it needed to be able to scale to a reasonable number. I couldn't just do this with 1 or 2 students. It needed to have a pretty broad reach. I really needed to fit into the research faculty's lives without causing them much more to do. Because if I go to my colleagues and say, hey, I've got this great idea for a program, it's only going to take you like 5 hours a week, they're going to laugh me out of their office and say, no way. So I needed to be just fit them in where they could fit and figure out how to minimize the time requirements on the faculty. I wanted to reach students who wouldn't normally participate in research and also be compatible with the reality of students' schedules, which is that they don't have a lot of time. It's not like they're like, gee, where should I find another like 10-hour project to do? They're just totally packed in. So I need to somehow balance out the time they need to put in this project with some reward for them. So the Early Research Scholars Program, I developed it about 3.5 years ago, and it's a program aimed at second-year students. And it provides them with research apprenticeships during the academic year. So the way the program works is that in the spring of their first year, students will apply to become part of the Early Research Scholars Program. Now, I'm using this term first year, second year very loosely, because I don't know how things are here, but at UCSD, those labels are meaningless. Students come in when they come in, they graduate when they graduate, there's a rough idea of how far along in the program they are, but students come in with, some students come in as like almost juniors, other students take 5 or 6 years to graduate, so there's no clear delineation of like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So these are students who are just getting started in computer science. They're in the early stages of that computer science program. They apply to join this program, and if they're accepted to the program, then they will spend a full academic year engaging in research activities. So what happens is 40 students are accepted into the program. They're grouped into groups of 4, and they're matched with a research mentor in the department. And in the fall, they start observing that research group. So they get together with their research mentor and just sit in on their research groups that they have, their research group meetings. At the same time, they take a research methods course. The students in the ERSP take a research methods course to learn the ins and outs of research, learn how to approach a research problem, how to struggle, how to learn independently, all the stuff that we know goes into research, but as a second-year student, they don't know anything about it. That's the fall quarter, and by the way, UCSD is on a 3 academic quarter academic year, so there's fall, winter, spring. In the winter and spring, they then, the outcome of the fall quarter is a research proposal. So each group collaboratively writes a proposal of what they will do over the winter and spring. The winter and spring then, they carry out this research project, and it culminates with a poster presentation in the end of the spring. So, this all sounds great, but when undergraduates, early undergraduates especially, do research, it often goes something like this. Here's a student, she was hired to do research, and she is now stuck. You know, she had good intentions, and now she's stuck, and she's sitting here thinking, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm intimidated, I'm all alone, how do I get through this? And on the other side of the fence is her advisor, and her advisor is sitting there thinking, she's not getting anything done, I guess she's just not cut out for research, I don't know how to help her, I guess we'll just give up. That is unfortunately a reality of early undergraduate research in many cases. Now, this is not true of every advisor. There are some advisors who are very skilled at working with early undergraduates, but this is certainly not the case for a generic professor in the department. So if I were to just release these groups to the faculty mentors, chances are things wouldn't go great in all cases. So we developed some support structures to offload some of the advising from the faculty mentor to a centralized team that could help support the students so that they wouldn't feel all alone and they wouldn't feel stuck. Or if they did, they would have somebody who could help them out, who was dedicated to helping them with those ways. So the first support structure is the team themselves. This is always a group-based project. Students come in and they are grouped into groups of 4. They are not doing research on their own, they're doing research with their team, and right from the start, we talk about team building, we talk about team support, yes?
You said grouped into groups of 4, so you're grouping?
I group them, yes. How do I group them? That is a great question. So we group them both on interest, so before the program starts, the faculty write up descriptions of the project they think the students will be doing, and students sort of rank the order of which they're interested in those projects. They also write up, the faculty also write up what knowledge the students are going to have to acquire in order to do that project, and I have students rank how confident they are that they could acquire the knowledge. And so I take those 2 things into consideration. And then the most important thing is the faculty member tells me when their group meetings are, and the students tell me, can I make it or not, and I match students based on their schedule. So I'd say interest and confidence is a good thing, but schedule is the most important thing. And sometimes we have to make adjustments, like sometimes a group isn't quite working out, so we'll do some shuffling early in the fall. But by the end of the fall, they're really starting to gel in their groups, and they're really working pretty well together in most cases. So, and this does not come for free, right? It's not like you just throw 4 people together and they'll magically work together. We have to drill the fact every day in that class that this is a team project. You're working together. You have to develop the strategies. You have to work with each other. And then by the time they're done with that, then they start to support each other kind of organically. Okay. So the other big support piece of this program is that it is dual mentored. So the students have these faculty mentors who guide their research. But as I showed you on the previous slide, often that can go awry. So instead of just having a research advisor, there is also a central ERSP mentoring team. And that consists of myself as the director of the program, but primarily my graduate student who helps support this program. So each week, every one of these 10 teams meets for at least half an hour with this graduate student whose sole goal is to help students stay on track with their projects. She does things like help them set goals, help them communicate, help them ask questions from their advisors. A lot of times, they're lost and they don't know how to ask what they need to ask. And so she can help them articulate the questions that then they can take to the advisor. And the advisor might not have the time to help the student get from lost to the question they need to ask. So this offloads some of that support from the faculty mentor to the central team. And this is really the piece that makes this program run. This centralized mentoring team holds it all together such that we have very high retention in the program, which I'll show you in just a minute. So, and then of course they learn these research skills through this research class that they take in the fall quarter, and the research class is very contextualized in that they're learning skills, but in the context of their research project. So when we're talking about how do you read a research paper, there's 10 different research papers being read for the assignment. Each research paper is particular to the project that the students are working on. So they're learning everything in the context of their project. Okay, and then the advisors kind of are free to do this more project-specific mentoring. Okay, so the results so far. This is still, especially assessment of this project is still a work in progress, because I think the real outcomes we're going to see are more long-term. Who goes on to graduate school, and what are their attitudes in the longer term? But as you can see, one of the goals of this program was to target women, underrepresented minority students, and we have quite high percentages of participation of women and/or, so this is and/or women, underrepresented minorities, so we have some women who are also members of underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. And, you know, so the reason these numbers are kind of coming down was early in the program, this is an NSF-sponsored program, early in the program, NSF is very interested in women, people from underrepresented groups, and students with disabilities. But at UCSD, we have kind of a broader range of diversity. So as the NSF funding kind of went away, we started focusing a little more broadly on what it means to attract a diverse group of students. So these are, some of these students here that aren't counted in the 65% are first-generation college students, or students from, you know, just with different kinds of experiences, low socioeconomic, who may be white males who wouldn't necessarily be counted here. We have, as I mentioned, a very high retention in the program. So for and in fact, in these first 2 years, the program was not just a single academic year, it was a quarter plus an academic year. So it was an even longer program. And so we had, in the first couple of years, 70 and 75% of the students completed the entire program. And last year, 92% of the students completed the entire program. This is this year, so this is still in progress. When I generated this number, it was still 95%. I think we've had one more student drop out, so we're a little bit below that. But most of the students do complete the full 3/4 of the program. We have very high retention in the major with this group of students. These numbers are a bit misleading because when you compare them to a control group of students who applied to this program but weren't selected to participate in the program, these numbers are also similarly high for that group. So this is good news, but maybe not a differentiating feature of this program. What is encouraging is if we look at the students who were selected into the program and compare them to that same control group, we see that their GPAs on average are slightly higher than the students in that control group. Now these numbers aren't statistically significant, so you know it could be just random chance. But it's encouraging that it does seem to have some carryover into their other courses. Okay, so the most exciting results, I think, though, are these qualitative results. So we had our external evaluator do a survey, an interview study with participants. And some of the quotes really indicate that we are getting at the goals of the program. So students reported that this program helped increase their professional networks. So one student from cohort 2 said, I definitely met people through the program. For example, the ERSP grad student. We're friends on Facebook and LinkedIn. Sometimes he checks up on me, so I thought that's kind of interesting because now I can ask people, how should I go about applying for grad school? Do you have recommendations and stuff like that? So it brought the student into a network that they wouldn't necessarily have had access to if it weren't for this program. Other things that we're seeing is that students are reporting an increased interest in grad school, and this is something I'll be really interested to track as students start entering graduate programs. A student in cohort 2 says, I can probably see myself in a grad program, master's and possibly PhD later if that changes. Easier now after this experience because before I was like, I'm not that smart. These people are like geniuses. No one does academic research because they're average. All these people are insanely intelligent. But doing the research, I feel like I could do that. It was a baby project, but I was doing a project. I was the group leader for that project and pushing it forward and got results like a poster. So this quote to me is very powerful because this student had an identity change, right? They sort of said, graduate students are other. This is not me. And then suddenly through this program they said, oh, it could be me. It's me on this track. And they can see themselves becoming and growing into the research persona. The other thing students get out of the program, based on this interview study, is a real sense of accomplishment. So the student said, I'm a computer science major, so I've never done any hardware. So at first it was, well, still now, I hear terms I don't understand. But after you just participate in the meetings, you start getting exposed to these vocabulary, and that's what I can definitely notice, especially if I go to other seminars on other topics. I can realize the connection between a lot of things, and that's a nice feeling. So the student is starting to feel more comfortable because of this program. And it is a very scary program for people to join, because as a sophomore, they're suddenly jumping in to this live research. And so for the first months, students report to me like, I am so lost, I feel so intimidated. But they start to hear the same terms over and over. And when they come back in their classes later on, they start to go, oh, I've heard that word before. I've done research with that. How cool is that? And they get pretty excited. All right. So that's kind of where we are with ERSP. It's still running, and it's going to continue running, and we're going to continue to do sort of longer-term assessment to see where these students go. I'm going to pause for a minute to see if anybody has questions about the program. Yeah.
Do you have specific roles for the graduate students associated with the research groups? Because it seems like that would be a potential.
Yeah, so I said there's a faculty mentor, and there's a nominal faculty mentor for each project. But oftentimes, that faculty mentor hands the mentorship role off to their graduate students, and that's often extremely successful. I won't say universally extremely successful, but it's often successful because that student is more in tune and is often deeper into the research than the faculty mentor, so they can provide more detailed technical support. Yeah.
How much this one depends on the personality of the student, and if you had any way you choose the students according to that, and how much experience the student need? Because I think a lot of the success depends on that advisor.
Yeah. So a lot of the success depends on the advisor, but actually because of the dual advising structure, less of the success depends on the advisor than it otherwise would. Because even if the advisor isn't exactly providing the support the students need, the ERSP mentor will catch that and then go talk to the advisor and say, hey, could you provide this for this group? Because I think that's what they need.
Or that's what I mean, advisor, the ERSP.
Oh, the ERSP, oh yes, it definitely depends on that ERSP mentor. So my graduate student that I hire has to be outstanding. I mean, this year she's phenomenal. She's doing a great job. This is her second year with the program. But in terms of, I think your question was the background of the students or the personalities.
Personality, how much?
Yeah, so the application that students complete to get into the program consists of 3 parts. One is their grades, so it selects for people above a threshold. We feel like if you don't have your head above the water in the courses you're in, you probably shouldn't be layering on research in addition. So this is just a kind of a threshold. The second thing is they fill out an essay of why they want to participate in the program. And the third thing is they fill out an essay about challenges, sort of diversity challenges in computer science. And based on their results their responses to these 2 essays, we have a bunch of people score those essays. We create a group that's kind of what we consider above the bar, who kind of respond in a way that we feel like the program will really benefit them. And then from that set, we choose randomly. So on the one hand, it's fairly broad, but on the other hand, everybody's been pre-screened for understanding the diversity issues and being committed to building a diverse environment in computer science. So students tend to be very supportive in this program.
So you described this as that part of the reason to try this at UCSD is to see how things like the Harvey Mudd approach scale.
Yeah.
And currently your cohort's 40.
Yeah.
So that's single-digit percentage of your computer science class.
Yeah.
So a single enthusiastic member of the instructional faculty can shepherd 10 groups of 4 through. So what is your expectation for the scaling? And what challenges do you expect?
That's a good question. I think, so we're at 40, which was always intended to be the steady state of the program. And because we're disproportionately focused on students who are underrepresented, we're actually covering a higher percentage of those students.
Okay.
So it's double digit, at least, percentages of those students. But that being said, for a single director and a single grad student helper, 10 groups is about as big as you can go. After that, it becomes very difficult to keep everybody straight. But we are looking, hopefully, to scale up, maybe not within computer science per se, but across the other engineering disciplines. And for that, I think we're going to need sort of a broader layered model. So rather than just one single advisor at that sort of central mentoring level, we're going to need to develop a structure where there are multiple advisors. And there's a program at the University of Michigan, the Europe program, that has done this extremely well. That's actually what I've modeled this program after. And they've got a really great infrastructure developed. The challenge is resources. Right? We need money, we need time, we need people to really devote their efforts to this program. And so that's kind of what we're working to solve right now, is how do we get those resources. Yeah.
Your numbers started in 2014, so I was curious if you have any numbers on how many of those people went on to graduate school.
Yeah, so we haven't, it's a great question. So because the students were very early, they were second year students here, so they've just now graduated.
But they would have already applied. So
yes, they would have already applied. So we haven't done that tracking yet. We just don't know. Anecdotally, I know several people are now in graduate programs, but I don't know if several is different from the baseline. I suspect it is, because very few of our students go on to graduate school in general. And I suspect that in the control group, it'll be very, very few. So, but we haven't done it. That's on our plan.
Is this credit bearing?
It is credit bearing, yeah. So they get, let me go back to the structure slide. So students get 4 units of major credit for this research methods course, upper division major credit, and they get 2 units for each of these quarters, which combined to make 1 upper division elective. So they basically get 2 upper division elective credits for this program.
And how do you assess?
How do we assess? That is a great question. So for the research methods course, I have a series of rubrics. There's a number of, it's largely based on their proposal and their presentation of their proposal. So that's a large chunk of the grade. But then there's portions for their research logs. They have to keep logs every week. They have to do assignments. It's kind of just like a course where I have assignments and rubrics. Assess them that way. The grades were very high in that research methods course. But they wouldn't be in the course if they didn't want to devote their energies to it. All right. Okay, other questions? I think I have time. I knew this would happen. I probably have time to talk about one of the 2 other programs that I was going to talk about. I think I'll talk about the micro classes. Okay, so as you mentioned, this is a small percentage of our students, whereas really we have these huge huge classes and a big student body. So what about the other thousands of students that were not being served through this ERSP program? This is where the microclasses project aimed to come in. We have these very large classes. Students may be getting lost. They're feeling kind of like, what am I doing here? And many of us in the teaching stream at UCSD came from small colleges. So I taught at Harvey Mudd. My colleague Leo Porter taught at, I'm blanking on the name of the school where he taught. I'll remember it in a second. But there's another small liberal arts college. And we said, at a liberal arts school in a small class, it feels very different. You know all the students. If they don't come to class, you can email them and be like, hey, what's up? I didn't see you in class today. And there's this direct line of connection between the instructor and the students in the class. We're in a large class, like, I don't know who's not there. I look at that, I'm like, okay, I see, hi, sure, I see, but I don't know who's not there. And there's no way I could possibly know who's there. So we wanted to figure out if there was some strategy for replicating Skidmore, that's where he came from. We wanted to figure out if there was a way to replicate the sense of community that you get in a small class within this large class. So what does a typical large class structure look like before we can talk about changing the structure of it? Typical large class structure at UCSD looks something like this. There are about 200 students in a typical section. That's kind of our basic unit of class, a 200-person section, because that's what most of our large classrooms can seat. We've got a ton of classrooms on campus that can seat 196 students. So about 200 students. And classes are run either Tuesday, Thursday, or in my case, I often teach a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. So it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 50-minute class. There is a discussion section led by a graduate teaching assistant once a week. That's also 50 minutes. And I don't teach a lecture style class. I teach a very active learning kind of class. I often use peer instruction with clickers. I have students do worksheets. We do tutor facilitated group work, interactive pre-reading, frequent low stakes quizzes. So there's a lot of sort of pedagogical structure that happens in my classes. But what we really aimed to get at was more of the social structure. So what we did was we devised this structure of the large class that we called microclasses, where we took a large format class and divided it into a set of smaller groups. And these microclasses comprised one teaching assistant, 2 to 3 undergraduate teaching assistants, or we call them tutors, and about 25 to 30 students. And the idea was that the students were grouped into these microclasses, and they actually sat with their microclass during the large format lectures. And the TAs and tutors were in the room with their class. So that when we stopped for these active learning activities, the TAs could sort of get up and be the leaders, and they would be the instructors during the breakout session time. And so they have like a little mini class during the large lecture class. Students would also go to their discussion section with their microclass. So the hope was that it would feel more like a small class, but we'd be in a big classroom, and my time didn't need to be increased. Right? I was still one instructor for the same number of students. Now, obviously, you can see that the TA and tutor resources are going to be increased here, but the idea was that that's a relatively cheaper way to increase the staffing than hiring more instructors, because that was just a non-starter. We can't get down to 30-person classes. It's not going to happen. So because we had this enhanced role for the TAs and tutors, we did a little bit more training with them. So the quarter before we ran this pilot, we trained them in working with their own students, leading a class, kind of giving them a little bit more prep than they might otherwise get as a TA because they're playing this enhanced role. So we piloted this format in our advanced data structures class. This is a class that's a sort of early upper division class taken mainly by third-year students, or late second year, early third-year students. And that quarter that we piloted it in the spring, I taught the class, and I had 2 different sections. One at 8 a.m., one at 9 a.m. I taught the 8 a.m. class using just the standard, regular old way of teaching, and I taught the 9 a.m. class using the microclasses format. So half the students were in this microclasses format. And then, because the student population, as I'll show you in a little bit, is a little bit different in the spring than it is in the winter, we also compared this to a secondary control, which I also taught in the winter of 2016, so the quarter before of the same class. So there's 2 controls. I'm teaching all 3 sections and 1 treatment condition, which is the microclasses. The way we evaluated this work was we used 2 different ways to measure kind of student happiness. We used this classroom community scale, which is a standard instrument to measure how connected students feel in a classroom, and it's divided into 2 subscales. One is the sort of community subscale, where you think about like social community, and the other is the learning subscale. It has a series of questions that are things like, I feel that other students care about my learning. What extent do you agree with that? I feel comfortable asking my peers for help. So those are the sorts of questions students are responding to on this instrument. And then we also looked at their end-of-term student evaluations to get a sense for their overall satisfaction. So before the term, the classes looked pretty similar. So in the micro classes and the primary control, they had similar average GPAs coming into the class. The other control section, a little bit higher, that was the winter section, slightly different group of students there. In the 2 primary controls, we had about the same number of computer science majors in the class. And we also administered that classroom community survey before the class started, talking about the previous courses they'd taken in computer science, and it was about the same. And the one difference we see here is that there were more women in the microclasses section than in the control. And we actually think, unfortunately, we don't have the data to figure this out. We actually think that after we announced the different structures of the classes, because we had to disclose it, and because of our IRB, we had to let people switch. Like, we couldn't lock them in, like, you may not switch sections. There was quite a bit of movement across the classes. And we think that actually women preferred and men did not prefer the microclasses section. And there was some disproportionate gender movement across the sections. Okay, so what did we find? Well, we found that overall, the microclasses section had a higher gain in terms of the classroom community scale. So the students in the microclasses section indeed felt more connected to each other than the students in the control section. And this was primarily due to that learning subscale. So the learning community really increased. The connectedness, how well they felt connected socially, that didn't change that much between the sections, but here the learning subscale definitely was different between the sections. They were also happier overall. So student evaluations, if we look just between the microclasses and the control in the same quarter, we have these two questions on our student evaluations that says, would you recommend this class? And would you recommend this instructor? And they're measured in terms of the percentage of students who say yes. So for the microclasses section, about 97% of the students said yes to those questions. For the control section, it was significantly lower. But we can see that maybe their students are kind of just cranky because like it's lower than usual. It's lower than that secondary control. Could have to do with the fact that it was at 8 a.m. Could also have the fact it could also be related to the fact that they kind of felt like guinea pigs, right? They're like, why don't we get the special treatment? Why do those people get this special thing? So I think they were just generally more unhappy. But if you look more broadly at the student evaluations, you'll see that the microclasses section really does stand out over the other controls when you look at the other questions we asked in the student evaluations, like, is the instructor proficient with the material? Is the instructor prepared? Things like that. The students were simply happier. Things like instructor starts class on time. Students said higher ratings for the microclasses section. So they tend to be just all around happier. However, so in terms of community, great. Microclasses definitely showed community gains. Overall satisfaction, microclasses students were generally happier, and it seems that women preferred this microclasses section. But in terms of grade and retention, there was no difference whatsoever. So we compared the grades and the retention and every possible measure you can think of, and there was absolutely no difference between the sections. So in the end, we kind of, I don't know, this was a sort of a partial success, but we're like, well, we threw these resources in, and yeah, it increased community, but didn't increase these performance metrics, and it was pretty expensive. So we've been looking at, since this pilot, which was a little over a year ago, I think, was it a year? Yeah, I think so, or maybe 2 years ago now, we've been looking at lighter weight versions of these interventions to see if we can get some of the same community gains without that super high cost of hiring like extra TAs and tutors. The other thing to think about, though, is the impact it had on the TAs and tutors. That's something we haven't really measured, but I think it actually had a very positive outcome for the tutors and TAs who were engaged in this offering as well. Okay, so I think in the interest of time, to respect everyone's time, I will not talk about my Coursera course. I'm happy to talk to any of you one-on-one about it, but I want to just wrap up and talk about my sort of feelings on the future of CS education at the higher ed level. And I really feel like, especially if I talk about my Coursera experience, that it's in person, it's in the classroom, it's developing these communities, it's really supporting the students in the class. So we've got to address different pre-college experience levels. We've got to give students a customized way to do this. So tiered courses within the CS program, I talked to many of you about that today. Time to pause and review. If you're getting off track, got to give those students time to catch up and to get back on track. Otherwise, they'll just leave. Building students' confidence, right? We've got a project right now trying to figure out how we can identify students that are at risk very early in the quarter, and then how do we intervene to help, right? Like, even if we know they're not going to do well, can we change the outcome for those students? Creating inclusive cultures. I talked to some of you about this idea that I've had. trying to maybe organize by affinity, by student identity. So instead of just being like randomly assigning students to groups, say, hey, how do you identify? How do you feel comfortable? Let's get a group of students who all feel comfortable in that way. That's sort of similar to the CS5 gold black, that the more you kind of feel included, the more comfortable you're going to feel and the more confident you're going to be. Okay, so this is real. The students are here, they're coming, and we really want to figure out how to develop these programs that are not just going to increase, not just going to cope with the volume, but to do so in an inclusive and equitable way. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much. All right, so I'm happy to take questions if there are any. I think I should say if you need to leave, I won't be offended whatsoever. Yeah.
At both Harvey Mudd and San Diego, could you give us an idea of how many people want to get into computer science but can't?
Yeah.
It's a big problem at our school. We
Absolutely.
have many hundreds
Yeah.
gone in, and we just say, I'm sorry you didn't make the
Yep.
GPA cutoff.
Yep, so that 3,000 number I showed you, that's 2,000 CS undergrads and then 1,000 in these sort of sister programs. Most of the students in those sister programs desperately want to be in computer science. And then there are more on top of that that are not counted in that number as well. So we let in a very small percentage of the students who would like to be in. It's a sad, sad situation.
Okay, did you apply any quotas, male, female, underrepresented?
Oh, great question. No, we absolutely cannot do that because we're a public university in California. But what we have done now, so we used to have a GPA, solely GPA-based criteria in a set of screening courses. And that GPA cutoff raised to 4.0. Like it was 4.0. If they had any A- whatsoever, they couldn't get in. And it was a disaster. There was no diversity. Students were super stressed. Students were dropping the class in the 9th week when they had an A-. I mean, it was just a ridiculous problem. So this year, this is brand new, what we've changed to is a lottery system. So now there's a 3.3 cutoff in those criteria courses, and then they just go into a random lottery, and they will get selected. And if they get in, they get in, and if they don't, they don't. So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Quick follow-up on that. The pool of people who are applying, did you notice if there was any change in gender based on when it was a lottery versus competition?
We don't, because they're just now, so the question is there any change in gender between the lottery and the competitive? We're just now getting the applicants for this lottery. They're not due yet, but I'll let you know when we do. Yeah.
With your experience with CS1 course at Harvey Mudd College, so my question is, how did you evaluate the student experiences?
How do we evaluate the student experiences in terms of?
Separating them into the two tracks.
Oh, how did we? Yes, so we had a very simple survey that said, tell us, like an incoming survey for the incoming students, tell us what you've done in computing in any way, like anything with a computer, and they would just write a sentence. And then we would say if it was anything involving the word programming in any way, they'd go one way, and then if they didn't say anything, if they said nothing, we went them the other way.
Okay, so my follow-up on that is that given there were these two different tracks, but it was the same credit, right?
Yeah.
So maybe A+ in the gold stream. How did you compare it to, I don't know, A- on a black?
We didn't compare it. We just said it's one course and you're going to get the grade you get.
And the students were happy about that?
You know, I think Harvey Mudd, there were some students who selected down because they wanted an easier path. Wait, here's the answer to that question in terms of the grade. First semester at Harvey Mudd, there are no grades. It's all pass or pass. So yes, it's true that it might be easier to pass the gold version, but that probably wasn't enough for a student to select into the gold version instead of the black version. But even still, students at Harvey Mudd, they tended to be more kind of about the learning. Like they want challenge. If anything, we were worried about the students who push themselves up when they should have been in the more introductory version.
Okay. I have one maybe dumb question. You can answer this later. Maybe we can talk about this. So you mentioned this a couple of times about the early research scholar program. You said it was specifically aimed, targeted at women and underrepresented minorities. How do you specifically aim those groups?
So we, two ways. One is, well, a few ways. One is we make it an inclusive inclusive call, right? We say, here we have a program, it's a supported research program, you don't have to have a lot of experience. Apply generally. And I think people who don't have as much confidence, who don't have as much background, are more likely to apply to a program that has a big funnel rather than like, I have to go knock on a professor's door. So that's one way to get students. And when I say underrepresented minorities and women, we really wanted to get the students who weren't engaging in research early. And that happened to be more women and underrepresented minorities, but there are a lot of other students who also weren't engaging in research early. The other way is by having them write this essay about what their understanding of diversity in computing is, what the value of it is, and why they support it or to what extent they support it. And it really separated the students who were sort of like, what's diversity, from the students who got it, right? Who were like, I understand that it's not equal for everybody. I understand people have different backgrounds and experiences, and I'm working to build a more inclusive culture. And so we get a bunch of students who are kind of more homogenous on that dimension, which tends to be a more diverse group in terms of gender and race.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Two different topics. So one is the gold and black track.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, did you notice any difference, like they were ill-prepared?
Right, yeah. So were they ill-prepared going forward? We did some sort of informal studies and found that actually they performed equally well in the second semester course, but it was very informal and it was like one semester. So we actually didn't follow them extremely well. Like anecdotally, we got half our majors from gold and half our majors from black, and they all seemed to be successful. So,
and were there faculty members that would say, "Oh, but these people"? Did you keep identifying them?
No. Like it really became impossible to tell. And that's the thing. Like, were there faculty members who said these people? No. Like Harvey Mudd. That's the special place. The thing about Harvey Mudd is like all of the faculty would never say that. They would just say, these are great students. We love our students.
Do you think your current institution, would that fly?
We do have it actually. So at my current institution, we do have a 2-track intro stream. We have a 2-quarter sequence for students with no experience and a 1-quarter sequence for people with experience.
But this counted as one sequence.
Right, this counted as one. So I don't know to what extent, we couldn't do this at UCSD because of the scheduling constraints. People would not sign up for the appropriate track. They would just sign up for whatever instructor they wanted or whatever fit their schedule or whichever one wasn't full. There's all kinds of reasons this wouldn't work at UCSD.
And my second, if I may, the micro classes, it was just that they were sitting in close proximity.
They were sitting in close proximity, and when there was breakout group work, the TAs and tutors would and there were empty rows between the micro classes. The TAs and tutors would sort of move around within their micro class. So they got to know the students a little more, at least in theory.
And I want to ask exactly on that, how helpful did you find the physical structure of the classroom for that?
Oh, you mean how unhelpful?
With groups of 5 or 4,
Yeah.
you still have problems, not alone
Yeah.
with the 15 or
Yeah, it was a big seating engineering project. So we had empty rows between the groups, and then we actually had empty rows within the groups so that the TAs and tutors could move between. So this was another cost of this program, that we had to get a room that was sufficiently large that it was underfilled. And the registrar doesn't like that very much.
Another question you had to. So the second is, these groups, have you found any way to see if these groups, if they meet after the class as well and have better, if they can interact better or can improve not only the learning thing but also the social aspects of the thing? Have you tried to make them meet up?
That's a good question. Have we tried to make them meet outside of class? We've had only very limited success. Our students are so diverse in terms of their outside of class roles and responsibilities, right? Like some students leave immediately to go home and take care of their family. Some students go work their 10 jobs. They're going all over the place. So I'd say we haven't had a lot of success with like forcing them to socialize outside of class. Do you have a question?
You sounded a little disappointed in the outcomes from the micro classes.
A little bit.
As a parent, if I had two choices of universities and one of them they end up learning the same thing and they're happier at the end,
Yeah.
I think that's worth something.
Yeah, it's definitely worth something. I mean, I wasn't disappointed. I just had extremely high standards. And I was like, we're going to have nobody drop from this class. And of course, the drop rates were the same. So, yeah, that might be just my high standards.
Anybody has any more questions, they're definitely welcome to come down and talk to Christine offline, but thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. This was so fun.